Welcome to Power Politics, where we prepare you for your next political conversation. I'm Jeronimo Cortina, political science professor at the University of Houston.
And I'm Brandon Rottinghaus, also a political science professor here at the University of Houston. Thanks for hanging out and talking politics with us. We are in the lead up to the primary, Jeronimo.
Yeah.
Texas is voting. Early voting has started. If you haven't voted and you plan to vote in the primary, get out there and do it. Earlier is better, we found. Fewer lines. Although I'm not sure you'll have much competition. We'll talk about turnout and we'll talk about all the sort of big picture things next week. But this week, we're going to focus in the deep on some key races here in Houston and Harris County, because there's some pretty interesting things happening. So we'll get a sense of how that's going to shake out, at least sort of our interpretation of the matter of the race.
The world that
so
keeps
far
giving and giving and giving.
It's impossible to get away from it. And I think a lot of politicians are finding that, including this week, Donald Trump, who's found out the, I guess, hard way that some of these legal kind of complications are going to catch up to him pretty quickly. And so we'll talk about exactly what happened this week, but also the political implications to it, and some of the things he said this last week that have been a kind of interesting window into kind of his belief about what's going to happen in 2024. But let's start with the fact that the hush money trial that he's involved in has been actually scheduled to go ahead starting on March 25th. A New York judge has effectively rejected demands for delays and has decided to push this forward. This will be a trial that is going to take place in New York. It'll be about 6 weeks long. It's kind of a long time. That'll cross over a bunch of primaries, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so this is the first criminal trial for a former president in history. We've talked a lot about the former president's legal problems, but that's not all, Jeronimo. This week, the judge ordered the president, former president, to fork over about $355 million in his fortune, plus interest. This is because of inaccurate reporting about the financial health of the former president's company. The judge also placed the company under an independent monitoring sort of process, imposed a 2-year ban on the former president's sons, Eric and Donald Trump Jr., and also basically kind of put some other hamstrings in the Trump organization's ability to function. Okay, so that's two big, basic, tough legal losses for the president this week. What do you make of how this is going to play out in 2024?
Well, I mean, the president has 4 criminal cases. 91 felonies counts, right? So that's,
it's a lot.
One too many. But
you saying 90 would be like, people would be like, that's okay. 91, it's like,
you're pushing
maybe
it.
Not.
I think, politically, obviously creates two-prong effect.
Right. Okay, there you go. Right? Yeah, I see. I like that analysis.
Throwing my word of the week.
Two-prong.
So first of all, within his core base, it helps him a lot, right? Every time that he goes to court, every time that he talks about these trials, his popularity amongst, his core base just jumps off the roof.
Yeah.
So that's all good news for him, right? On the other side, right, it has the same or the negative effect, right? The opposite effect.
Yes.
And that creates that within, those that do not support President Trump within the Democratic Party and within the Republican Party and within independents, it has a negative effect.
Yeah.
So the big question here for the general election, if he gets nominated by the Republican Party, I'm still,
Still holding out?
I mean, I'm not holding out. I just want to see competition, right? That's it.
Yeah.
It's the free market of ideas. That's democracy.
Sure,
right?
sure.
So that's what I want to see, a good democratic competition.
Gotcha, yeah. Well, Nikki Haley this week says she's hanging on. She had a big announcement. People were like, she's dropping out. She didn't drop out. She said she's going to fight until the last dog's dead.
Right?
So.
And increasing, to that effect, right? And to that effect, she's increasing her rhetoric and she's increasing the tone of the attacks.
That's a good point.
So we're going to see that. So at the end, what I'm trying to say is that we're going to see how, right, deep those situations go. Okay. And as we get into these 4 criminal cases, things are going to get more complicated and more complicated and more complicated. So we're going to see, that effect. The question is how big it's going to be with Trump supporters and how it's going to be with the people that do not necessarily support former President Trump.
Yeah, it's a really good point. A couple of things worth noting. I think number one is that his political power is not just used for his own good, but also for the good of other people he's endorsing.
True.
Remember, there are a bunch of Republicans down ballot who are being endorsed by Trump, many of them in Texas, and they're fighting out like with establishment Republicans or incumbent Republicans to try to win. And so that might be of interest to note too, that if his political kind of, patina is a little bit more tarnished than it was because of the kind of combination and kind of compilation of all of these different legal problems, that it could be an issue for him. The other thing I wanted to note is that this is a cash problem too, right? Like the Trump organization's one issue, right? That their inability to, sort of act as they would have otherwise. But this is going to be a real cash kind of problem for the former president, right? This is a lot of money. In fact, looking at the actual total bill that he would owe, in addition to interest and all the other kind of penalties, it's almost $500 million.
Wow.
That's more money than he probably has, and no one really knows exactly how much, but that's more money than he probably has. The other part of this is that a lot of the money they're raising for the campaign is going towards his legal defense. So Joe Biden this week put up big numbers in terms of fundraising, and Trump is lagging behind that, not by a lot, but by enough that if you subtract out the money they're spending on legal bills, it could be a real liability for them. So remember, presidential races are about the long haul, right? You've got to be ready for this marathon. And if you can't make it past the first, mile and you run out of money, then it's a real issue.
Yeah.
So I think that's a concern. The other thing is I want to say that you make this kind of comment, I think that's right, about the way that the Republicans view this. And certainly Republicans view his legal problems differently than the general public does. But I think it's also the case that you're going to find that in some swing states, polling suggested that there are a lot of people, 50% would refuse to vote for Trump if there was a criminal conviction. So that's really the key, is the criminal conviction. But most people also want to see this done by the election. They want to know definitively what is the outcome. I'm not sure we'll have that, but we're certainly going to see him fight on through this.
Oh, absolutely. But again, it's going to be, it's going to be very interesting. And still you have a lot of people at play, right? Yeah. You have Biden, you have Nikki Haley, right? Mm-hmm. And you have, within the civil war within the Republican Party, you still have powerful people that do not support President Trump.
Yeah.
And once again, we'll see.
We'll see. Well, one way to heal a party is through a vice presidential pick. That's often what a nominee will do to try to bring the party together. The former president kind of hinted at his shortlist for VP.
Right.
He talked about Vivek Ramaswamy. He talked about Ron DeSantis. He talked about Noem, who's the governor of South Dakota. So there are a couple of options there that he's seemingly considering. Tim Scott was another person.
Right.
They've become friendly of late.
Yes.
What do you think about his list and whether or not there's a strategy in terms of picking one or the other of those people?
Well, I mean, he said it, right? Mm-hmm. He said that basically the VP doesn't matter.
Oh, yeah.
What matters is who's running for president.
But he's still mad at Mike Pence for mattering. So that's really something to note. But
that's true. But I don't know. I mean, we're going to see.
Yeah.
And I think that his pick is going to be determined in terms of who or what part of the general electorate he wants to get.
Interesting, yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's a good question. And we'll have this debate, I'm sure, when he gets closer to making this pick, assuming he gives us some heads up with. I don't think he will.
Right.
I think he'll tweet it out on a whim, right? Or social.
Well, they need to do the printing materials and all that kind of stuff. But, nowadays with technology, you can get those on.
You just do
hours.
big Trump and little whatever.
Right.
DeSantis.
Correct.
So the VP maybe doesn't matter that much. But speaking of Trump headlining things, he was at SneakerCon this week. Did you know the former president is sneakerhead? He apparently is producing through his licensing of his name to this other company to make these shoes that are $400, the Never Surrender shoes that are bright gold with an American flag on it, as you might expect from Trump. What do you think about this? And when are you going to sport these bad boys? Because I'm really looking forward to seeing you have them on.
Well, it's a little bit expensive for my taste at $399, and they're sold out. Right?
Okay.
They just had 1,000 pairs.
Right.
They have been sold out, I think, within seconds. And they had very strict rules, only 3 pairs per customer.
Really?
Oh,
Okay.
yeah. I went to the website and see everything. And in addition, they have colognes and perfumes for $99.
Okay. Not a bad deal for quality cologne.
Victory 47 cologne.
That's what it's called. That's great.
If you want to, smell good or whatnot.
Smell like Trump, yeah.
So, it's one of those things that it's like, wait, what?
It's such a strange marketing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Trump steaks, Trump wine, the Trump properties is sort of where they made their money.
Correct.
And now things are branched out into a very
I think
direction.
that when he went to SneakerCon, he was met with both a loud boos, but also cheers, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's indication of how, Trump is look within the general public.
Yeah.
You have people booing at him and then people cheering at him.
Yeah.
And that's, how
It's very
divisive,
polarizing, yes,
right?
yes.
How polarizing is his figure. But the question, and I was trying to think of, any other instances, right? In Europe, presidencies call it that it's a riveting topic.
Indeed.
Super deep and super interesting. It's, has ever happened to have, a potential nominee running for the presidency. Saying
who's marketed in this sort of
let's
unusual
go and
way.
sell sneakers.
It's a great question. It's not that common. T. Roosevelt did, right? Teddy definitely was pretty, I think, sort of visible from that image perspective, but he had been out of the office, right, before.
Right.
And so there's certainly some of that. Yeah, it's interesting. It's a really good question, but the short answer is no.
Okay.
We've never seen it kind of go this far, but I do think that there's room for this in politics, right? People really like to kind of embrace all these different elements of it. And I love to collect political stuff.
I know.
I'm totally...
That's why I wanted to get the sneakers to give them to you.
For $400, a little steep for kind of a collector's thing, but it's fun. And I think, for people who really want to embrace that, then it's certainly fun. And so I like this about our politics, right? So it's definitely useful. But I saw a lot of people trolling the former president and the shoes, right? One of my favorites was that somebody said they tried to dunk in them, but all it could do was draw charges. So I guess that's a dad-ish joke, but anyway, I think it's strange, but fun, and maybe we can leave it at that.
All right, let's leave it at that.
But let's talk Texas, because obviously there's a lot going on. We're in the middle of voting, so people are primed to think about that. This is Party Politics. I'm Brandon. This is Jeronimo. We are talking about primaries. So lots of interesting races here locally, and that's kind of where we hang our hat. Let's talk first about Sheila Jackson Lee's district. This is Congressional District 18. The representative is being challenged by former city council member Amanda Edwards. This has turned into a pretty serious race. Remember, Sheila Jackson Lee runs for mayor. She loses that fairly badly. And all indications were that turnout in her district inside the city limits was not great. It was fairly lackluster. And it could just be a reflection of the fact that it was a different race she was running for.
Correct.
People weren't comfortable with her running for it. She didn't run a great campaign. She didn't raise as much money as she could have. The messaging was a little blurry. It's a long way of saying she didn't run a good campaign for that. Do you think that has spillover effect in her race for now, again, running for 18?
Well, I think so, because first of all, Amanda Edwards, Sheila Jackson Lee was campaigning for the city. She was campaigning for Congressional District 18.
Yeah.
So she has been at it. She has support. She has, significant fundraising numbers. Yeah. And I think she has run a very interesting campaign in the sense of, now it's time for new leadership.
Yeah.
Right? It's time to, pass the baton, and that's it.
Yeah.
So that is the interesting part, right? The other part in terms of, what would happen, thinking about the consequences of who wins and who loses, if Amanda Edwards wins, right? I mean, it's going to be very interesting because, that's a new generation, right? And the Democratic Party needs new blood within the party, as well as the Republican Party. They need new blood in order to have, starting to climb, the echelons of power. Yeah. That's one. If Sheila Jackson Lee, wins, you maintain seniority, right? It's one of the most senior members of Congress, very important positions, and, the balance of power is also extremely important. Yeah. So I think there's, pros and cons.
Yeah.
But it's going to be a tough race no matter what.
Yeah, that's her. Sheila Jackson Lee's made a case that experience counts in this. And that's a subtle reminder that she has long relationships in this district, right? You can't look at a picture of people in the district without her in it, right? And that shows that she's visible. She's extremely connected. And that's what people like about her. So I don't think that's changed much. But obviously, the contest here does present a kind of serious contrast. And it's really, for me, a kind of a question about like exactly who can get their coalition out. Sheila Jackson Lee has always been successful at getting her votes out, but she never really had a serious challenge like this. So this is going to be a real test of her organization. And with turnout probably, my guess is sort of lackluster. I don't know that the ability for Amanda Edwards to kind of overcome that hurdle is going to be there, but this is still a race that's going to be fought out on the ground, probably all the way through Election Day. So we will see. I think Edwards has presented a really clear and compelling message, and it's hard to dispute the fact that a lot of members of Congress have been there for a very long time. So there's a younger generation, like you say, that really wants to see that change. But that's really hard when they don't come out and vote in bigger numbers. So that's the real difference. And so that has to change in order for, I think, some of these younger candidates to really win. I think the same is happening in House District 142. This is Representative Sean Thierry. She is running against labor organizer Lauren Ashley Simmons, who's been very well funded by several Democratic members, including several sitting House members, the influential Houston LGBTQ plus caucus. The reason that this is a race is because Sean Thierry, while in one of the prior legislative sessions, supported Senate Bill 14, which would bar gender transitioning care for children and teens. She was very vocal about this on the House floor. Republicans came to her aid saying she's voting her district and her conscience. People in her district, especially Democrats, said she's betrayed us. Yeah. This is a tough race because a lot of Democrats are in a similar position. Harold Dutton actually is a very similar position to this. That's another kind of semi-competitive race. This race is probably more competitive because there's money behind it. Oh, yeah. And so Simmons has got a lot of support. There was also a fairly ugly affair in the Chronicle endorsement meeting. After a kind of back and forth, Thierry interrupted Simmons, who was talking about how she had the support of several of Thierry's colleagues. And Thierry made a comment that she said was taken out of context about some of the members who are gay. So that didn't sit well, I think, as a kind of closing statement for her. What do you think about this race in terms of the dynamics that are going to play out inside the Democratic Party?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think the Democratic Party sees like, why did you vote for this thing?
Yeah.
Right? No one needed your vote.
Right. Like, yeah, it was going to pass no matter what.
Oh, yes. I mean, Republicans had the votes already in their pocket.
Yeah.
No need for that. Yeah. Right? And yes, I mean, party loyalty matters, right? Party loyalty matters whether you're a Democrat or a Republican.
And I had that exact point, yeah.
And it's extremely important, right? Yeah. And also if for the Democratic Party, the Democratic caucus in the House, it's important, right? Because now she's going to, if she wins, right, Democrats are going to be like, no. Yeah. So that's going to create a tension in which she might switch parties.
Interesting,
right?
Yeah.
And then Democrats are going to lose one position. So that's one thing, not the district, because the district is fairly, Democrat leaning. So that's not a problem in the next election and whatnot.
Yeah.
But obviously, in terms of how the issues have been floated, right? Yeah. And I think that, the support that Ashley Simmons has, Laura Ashley Simmons has, is going to be very interesting because she's very well funded, very key endorsements, right? And the race is just bring it on.
It's really going to be, I think, a bit of a toss-up. It's really about kind of getting your people out. But this is a consequence of gerrymandering, it seems to me, right? You draw these districts in such a way that there's no variation in your ability to represent your district. Either you're very blue or very red. And that's a limitation, right? So we talk a lot about how gerrymandering affects Republicans, but the fact is it affects Democrats too in equally the same way. So this is a good example of how that has definitely become an issue. So Republicans are coming to her aid. Texas for lawsuit reform is coming to her aid. So there are a lot of these kind of Republican groups and people who are backing this Democratic candidate. So that's definitely another kind of talking point, which is problematic. Let's talk about another big race here in Harris County, and that's for the district attorney. Kim Ogg is the incumbent. She's being challenged by a former member of her office, Teare. There were a lot of bad blood in this race. They've got endorsements all across the county, right? Democrats, taking sides in this. You've got a pretty serious battle over a bunch of really important issues for the district attorney, right? How to deal with intake, how to deal with the bail issue, right? At first, Ogg was on board with bail reform efforts, which were constitutionally sort of challenged, and then she kind of backed off of it. There's an intake problem that is about how they choose to prosecute certain cases and with what evidence. She dismantled that, and that was a talking point. Right. She's been on the firing line for two big other issues. The first is that she allowed for a former kind of prosecutor who has strong ties to the Texas Republican Party to investigate Judge Lina Hidalgo, who is very popular among Democrats, especially young Democrats. And the fact that she, of course, ended up with charges filed against some of the judge's staffers means that you're going to go to battle on this with the primary audience. So tell me about this race. What do you think is going to happen here? And does this indicate that there's a real sea change in terms of like where the Democratic Party is going to go, right? She kind of ran as a reformer and didn't always live up to that, right? In a way that other kind of Democratic DAs did across the country or across the state. So is this really the final kind of straw for her, or do you think that she can fight through this and win?
I mean, I think it's going to be also very competitive, very complicated, right? Thierry has, again, a lot of endorsements, a lot of money. Right?
That money battle even up pretty quickly, right?
Oh, yeah. And again, what he's talking about, he's not talking about, I think, very, let's call it, left-leaning progressive issues.
Great
right?
point.
You just said it. It's very operational. Intake, bail reform. And, he's talking about restoring morale, competence, optics, right? If you have perhaps a conflict of interest, send it to another DA.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And end of story, right?
A lot of what Democrats, including he, are saying is that, that the district attorney has basically turned the office into like a grudge factory. And I don't know how true that is, but like you could make that case. And as you say, it's the optics that really make it the most damaging for her. So I think that's a real kind of problem she's going to face. So polling suggests that he's way out ahead.
Oh, yeah.
That's stunning to see that much of a difference. And I'd be surprised if Democrats were that mad at her, but it very, very rarely be the case that they are that mad at her. And my actually interest in this too is beyond all these things, and that's the influence that Judge Hidalgo has in Democratic circles in Harris County. Can she move the needle here, right? She was one of the first people to very vocally be against Kim Ogg for obvious reasons, like I just said, but can she move the needle on the Democratic Party in a state, like challenging a different member of her own party saying this person is not Democratic enough for us? That'd be a pretty stunning outcome, actually, of all of this, if it's true.
Well, I think she has, the connections. She's smart. Also, Kim Ogg is very smart as well. And it's going to be a battle. But, the Harris County Democratic Party has admonished Kim Ogg, right? So that's the first sign that, the balance perhaps is tilting the other way towards Judge Hidalgo. So we're going to see in the sense of how this turns out, but I think that Hidalgo has the political power to say, you're not Democrat enough.
Interesting. That's fascinating. So we'll see how that plays out. Let's talk about one Republican race, the last one we'll get to for the week, and that's in House District 138. This is where former Harris County GOP Chairman Jared Woodfill is challenging Representative Lacey Hull. A lot of baggage here. Obviously, Woodfill is a former Harris County GOP chair, was at the helm of a bunch of hardline conservative kind of policies. He had been an attorney of record for some very kind of controversial type cases. He represents Steve Hotze, who obviously is very much to the right, including in all these kind of incidents about investigating vote fraud. So he's got lots of baggage. She has some baggage too. And it says he's running for speaker, right? So it's not just he's running for House, he's running for speaker too. That's a tough call, I think, for a lot of Republicans who they're like, well, I don't know if I want you to do both. Maybe one, but not the other. But I do think this will be a pretty competitive race. The question is here, like whether or not conservatives really come out in big numbers in Harris County for this race. I'm not sure. We'll see.
Well, I mean, indeed, we're going to see. But this is one of the races that is Paxton versus Abbott, indirectly, right? Mm-hmm. And Representative Lacey Hall is, first of all, an incumbent. So she has the power of incumbency right there. And also she is very conservative.
Yeah,
I mean, like her record is very conservative.
Right.
So going to the right of that is that, wait, what?
Right.
I mean, like her record is very straightforward in terms of what, she has voted for and supported for. So it's going to be very interesting, but it's once again the proxy wars, right?
Yeah.
Whether you voted for impeachment, then you're going to be primaried, then, Abbott, et cetera, et cetera. So we're going to see what happens.
And a signal about, like how much authority that conservative wing of the party has. Can they bring out their voters in these districts? We'll see. Last thing to talk about the week, this is the sort of Texas roundup, and that's that a judge has rejected Ken Paxton's bid to dismiss a securities fraud case. So it's set for trial April 15th. This is a 9-year-old case. This is before Trump was president, while Taylor Swift was on her 1989 tour, and just as Daily Show was not being hosted by Jon Stewart. Now Trump's running again. Taylor Swift runs the world, and Jon Stewart's back.
Yes.
I don't know the delay is going to matter here, but I think he's got a bit of a cushion because he's not running. But it may affect his people who he's endorsing, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So I think maybe he doesn't mind that much because he likes the friction, but politically speaking, it could be kind of a danger for him.
Oh, absolutely. And the consequences, right? The federal charges carry up to 99 years in prison.
Very serious.
So that is very serious. Yeah. This is not a political impeachment trial.
Yeah.
This is a real trial. Yes. So in that, it has very important consequences.
Yeah.
But whether it starts April 15 or something magic happens between now and then, we're going to take it up next week. I'm Jeronimo Cortina.
And I'm Brandon Rottinghaus. The conversation keeps up next week.